Our second presentation today is by Yael, Karlinsky, Shichor, and Oded Netzer, and they're going to tell us about automating the B2B salesperson pricing decision. Can machines replace humans, and when? So I'd like you to welcome them to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Today I'll tell you about our project where we introduced automation to the pricing process in a B2B retailer. Where automation in the past mainly substituted for repetitive and predictable human tasks, such as routine data processing and the employee punching holes in the production line. Today, automation more and more taps into domains that require interpersonal communication and soft skills. And while automation on one hand is a very strong movement today, but also we realize that pricing decisions are at the core of every business, the two never really intersected so far. And specifically, we will look today at the B2B salesperson making pricing decisions in a retailer selling aluminum. And this B2B salesperson, her work is composed of two forces. On one hand, she is working on a repeated pricing task where she prices aluminum products, dozens of decisions a day with repeated interactions with clients. So on one hand, she deals with a lot of codable aspects of the work. On the other hand, she works in a market with daily prices, we changing prices on a daily basis, as well as interactions with clients where clients interact with salespeople and share information, whether via email or over the phone. And over those interactions, a lot of information which is important or may be important to the pricing decision may be exchanged. For example, the client may share with the salesperson that the product is very urgent for him, and therefore the client will decide just this time to increase the price, something she wouldn't have done otherwise. Alternatively, the client may share with the salesperson that the competitor is now offered this specific product for a lower price. So the salesperson will decide just this time to decrease the price. And overall, we see, and this is something that is unique to B2B settings, that salespeople, not only they don't follow a price menu, but they have the power and the freedom to vary prices between clients and also between transactions for the same client. And when we look at the evolution of automation, and specifically at our task of automating the B2B salesperson today, we see that a few important elements make it different than what automation used to be. First of all, where automation used to deal mainly with codable input, the input to the salesperson is mixed with, on one hand, codable input, such as the characteristics of the quote. On the other hand, soft input, such as input from the client and interpersonal communication. Whereas in the past, automation substituted mainly for technical skills, the skill we are looking here is a skill that is salesmanship and requires understanding the client's willingness to pay and interpreting that willingness. And finally, while most automation tasks had a clear output, such as whether to invite a candidate to an interview or not, or whether the X-ray image includes an irregularity in it or not, that is, there are all yes or no outputs. In our case, the pricing decision is the decision of the salesperson, while the outcome is actually profit, which is a nonlinear function of price. So to summarize what we're trying to do here, we're trying to look at whether we can introduce automation to the pricing process in B2B, and specifically, can the benefits of a model of automation, which is scalability and consistency, overcome that loss of information and soft skills when we move from the salesperson to an automated salesperson, so to speak? Then we ask, can we, through automation, preserve some of those soft skills and expertise into the process of automation? And finally, what are the cases that we would like to automate and when would it be most beneficial? We worked with the company, and today the company is called Hadco Metals. Today we have Mr. Michael Resnick, who is the deputy CEO of that company. And I will invite Michael later to join me here and tell you more about the project from the company's perspective. And just to start off the discussion, I will tell you that Hadco shared the history of sales transactions with us, which enabled us to approach the problem of automation and later on test the automation solution in a field experiment that we ran with them. So how did we approach the problem of automation, of automating the B2B salesperson at Hadco? Our approach was to create an automated version of the salesperson that will mimic the salesperson's pricing policy based on her past pricing decisions and will reapply it automatically and consistently to new pricing decisions in order to create the most accurate representation of that salesperson. We looked at the CRM system that salespeople work with, and we tried to extract the most information that salespeople use in the pricing process and include it into our model. Specifically, we included the identity of the client, its past pricing and quoting, its past purchase and quoting history. The product they requested, specifically in this business, the way it works is that the client approaches the company with a need for a specific product and quantity, and the salesperson provides a price quote for that request. And so we have the specific request of the clients for which product and what are the specific characteristics of the product, as well as what was the cost of the product in the system. And the outcome variable we're looking at, or the decision variable we're looking at, is the one that the company cares about, which is margins that are defined that way by the company, and we follow their steps. And what we do is we use that margin as the dependent variable. We use the logistic transformation of margin as the dependent variable for our model, where the access variables are all the variables, all the information that I showed you on the last slide. And in addition, we add a random client intercept to capture the relationship between the client and the salesperson into our model. We run this regression separately for every salesperson in order to capture the heterogeneity in the pricing process across salespeople in the company. And I would mention at this point that from what you'll see from now on is a linear specification of the salesperson. We also tried other machine learning and nonlinear specifications. And while some of them, such as the random forest, captured the pricing process fairly well, in our simulations of profits, they did not do so well. So we decided to go with the better performing model, the linear model. So very quickly, just to understand this descriptive model of the salesperson, and we'll go over an aggregate estimation of how salespeople make pricing decisions in the company. And just to highlight a few interesting issues, the company is giving a significant quantity discount. It is rewarding frequent clients with lower margins. It, of course, charges more for processing. But maybe most importantly in our context, I mentioned that relationship in this context matters. And indeed, we see that when the client interacts with the regular salesperson, they receive lower margins relatively to interacting with other salespeople. So indeed, we see that relationship affects pricing. Now, what we've done so far is we looked at the history of every salesperson in the company and created a pricing model, an automated representation of each salesperson that can predict prices instead of the salesperson. What would be the best way to test that automated salesperson? it would be to run it in a field experiment. And luckily, we were able to do that with Hadco. And for 8 consecutive business days, we provided price recommendations in real time to salespeople at Hadco that were based each on their own individual automated version. I would say at this point that because we had only 17 salespeople working at the company at this time, we decided to randomize the treatment at the quote level rather than at the salesperson level. And this is how specifically our intervention worked. First of all, we start business as usual. The client calls the company, they ask for a product and the quantity for the product, and the salesperson inputs the new quote into the system, including the price that she decides to give for that specific quote. Only then we randomly assign each of these quotes to either treatment or control. And in the back end, we calculate based on the specific characteristics of the quote, the identity of the client, and the specific model of the salesperson pricing this quote, the recommended price for the quote. Then the salesperson, and that happened within 2 seconds of inputting the quote into the CRM system, received an email that looked like that. So what we see here is, first of all, we tell the salesperson, based on your previous pricing decisions, the price recommended for this quote is. And then the salesperson can see her own price that she had just inputted into the system and the recommended price and respond in 3 different ways. She can either keep her own prices, she can accept the recommendation of the model, or she can move to an edit form that will allow her to manually edit the prices. In order to keep the control condition and the treatment condition as similar as possible, we also send an email to the control condition that looked very similar but did not include the price recommendation. And finally, they choose their response and send the price quote to the client with the selected price. And now let's see what was the effect of automation on profits to the company during the course of the experiment. So what we see is that providing a price recommendation to salespeople in real time, a price recommendation that is based on their own model, on their own history of prices, significantly and substantially increased profits to the company by as much as 10% in the treatment control in the treatment condition relatively to the control condition. When specifically over the course of the 8 days, we calculated that the increase in profits amounted to $24,000, and when we extrapolated to a yearly increase in profits, it amounts to over $1.3 million. It is important to note now, and Michael can tell us more about it very soon, that the company is now implementing our solution to provide real-time price recommendation to every quote that is coming into the system to help their salespeople make pricing decisions. To further understand where this is coming from, we went ahead and made another analysis. Now remember that there are 2 types of errors that the salesperson can make here. The salesperson can make a type 1 error by overpricing and losing the deal. The second error could be underpricing and leaving money on the table. And in order to separate those two types of errors of the salesperson, we use the Craig-Hurdle model that enabled us to separate the 2 processes that are going on here. And indeed, what we see here, that the increased profits to the company due to automation come from increased acceptance by clients, but that conditional on acceptance, the profits of the treatment condition are not significantly higher than those of the control condition. So the model is correcting for overpricing, and by that increasing profits. And the marginal effect of the 2 effects is still positive and significant. Finally, and before we move on, I would just like to show you another robustness check that we did to our experiment to make sure that the treatment did not leak from the quotes we treated to the quotes that we did not intend to treat in the control condition. And one mechanism through which this could happen is through learning. If the salesperson is getting a few consecutive price recommendations in which the model recommended a higher price than the salesperson, and then she decides on the next quote to increase her pricing because she realizes she's underpricing, but we did not intend to treat that fifth quote, in that case, we will have a contamination of the control condition. In order to make sure that this did not happen, we compared the difference between her original price and the model's price along the course of the experiment, and we see that that difference did not decrease. That is, salespeople are not learning, and there was no contamination of that control condition in the experiment. To summarize what we've done so far, we were able to test the solution of automation in a field experiment, which is great, but it had its limitations. One limitation is that we could only provide the automation in the form of a recommendation system. The second one is that salespeople had the power to choose whether to adopt the price recommendation or not. And indeed, we saw fairly low levels of compliance with the model's recommendation in our experiment. Indeed, what we see is that salespeople adopt or feel more comfortable with the price recommendation of the model when the quote is relatively less complex or when they quote for familiar clients or more common products. So there is a hint here to a case where the model is useful in some cases where maybe the salespeople should price in other cases. So in order to fully test the potential of automation, as well as the question of when is it most beneficial to use automation, we went ahead and calculated profit counterfactuals for the data that we have from the company. And in order to do that, we used the price recommendations from the pricing model that I showed you earlier. We estimated a demand model in this environment to understand how clients behave based on the different pricing schemes. And finally, using those two model estimates, we could calculate profit counterfactuals for every quote in a holdout sample that we kept out of the analysis. So again, we have two pricing schemes, one for that we observe in the data by real prices by the salespeople. Then we have the predicted prices by our model. And for both of those, we can calculate expected profits per quote. And this is what we find. When we apply automation or when we use the model's price to all of the quotes in the holdout sample, we found that the model performs significantly better and generates expected profits which are 5% higher than those of the salespeople. Now remember what's going on here. We completely eliminated all the part that the salespeople are doing, which is based on interpersonal communication and soft skills of interpreting the client's willingness to pay and their history of the clients based on relationship. And we only use the codable part. And even with only doing that, the model is able to generate higher profits. But then we already realized, based on previous evidence from the experiment and also on previous research, that relationships play a very important role in this business. So what would be a good way to understand when the salesperson is indeed the right one to price the quote, when indeed there is some information that would make it more beneficial for the salesperson to price the quote rather than the model of the salesperson? So in order to do that, we looked at the difference between the model's price and the salesperson's price. And what we do here is we say the following thing. If that difference is small, we will add the model price. But if the salesperson is significantly different than her own model that is based on her previous history, on her pricing history, in that case, she may have known something such as the competitor is offering a lower price, and therefore she significantly lowered the price. And in those cases, we will let the salesperson make the pricing decision. So overall, for each salesperson in the salesforce of the company, we found the optimal share of salesperson versus model in the decision of when to allocate the quote to automatic price and when to allocate the quote to human pricing. And what we see is the following. For 3 salespeople in the company, we see that it is best to completely replace them with their own model. This generates the highest profits. For 3 salespeople in the company, we see that we don't want to replace them, we don't want to interfere with them. They are beating their model on every one of the quotes. But for the rest and the majority of the salespeople in the company, indeed what we find is that there is a sweet spot that combines the model and the human element. And overall, we see that across the salespeople in the company, when we use the model for pricing about 80% of the quotes, of the incoming quotes in the company, but deferring to the salesperson with the rest of the 20%, this gives us the optimal allocation of model and human with pricing the decisions in the company. And as you can see, using the hybrid, even relatively to using purely the model, further increases profits to the company, and this difference is significant, and overall, it is nearly a 7% increase in profits relatively to pure human pricing that we observe in the data. Finally, it is interesting to understand what are those 20% of the cases that we would like the salesperson to price rather than the model. And what we find is that indeed the salesperson is doing better relatively to the model in the cases where the quote is more complex, such as it is extremely big, it includes more lines, more product requests per quote, or it requires more complex processing. And now what I would like to show you is where we see this going forward. So this is the demo we created based on the company's website. And while the company is now implementing the automation solution based on a price recommendation, where this is going is towards a fully automated website where clients can approach the website online and ask for a price quote and indeed receive a price quote for the majority of products. So for the regular and common products, we see that a model can provide a price for those. But in other cases where the client is requesting for a unique product, such as a unique shape or specific dimensions that are irregular, in those cases, we would not want the model to provide the price quote. And in that case, a flag will rise at the website and tell to the client, please call us for a price. And this is where we see automation going forward in replacing not just making the majority of pricing decisions, but also the decision of when to use the model for pricing and when to use the human expert. And although we looked at this problem from the seller side, a recent report also states the same insights from the buyer side, that they prefer to interact online, but talk to an agent only if they request for a new product or a product with new specifications. Let me summarize. What we've seen is that automation led to higher profits, both via a field experiment and through counterfactuals, through 2 vehicles of operation. First, through better pricing, but then eventually by eliminating some of the sales force in the company and saving costs on sales force salaries. Then we see that the hybrid automation is going from a form of a recommendation system to a full automation solution that will not only make the majority of pricing decisions, but will also decide when to price and when not. And specifically, I want to note that this hybrid pricing solution is addressing preservation of knowledge in the company in two important ways. First of all, by learning the expertise of the salesperson, but also by keeping the expert in the picture only for the cases where this is needed. That is, where it was mainly believed in the past that B2B salespeople are indispensable. We find that in many cases, it is possible to replace them with an automatic model, while in a smaller share of the cases, it is best to keep them and use their soft skills and expertise. And we do believe that automation can do to B2B what Amazon did to B2C. And in terms of changing that world and how it works. But instead of me telling you that, I would like to invite now Mr. Michael Resnick from Hadco to join me and tell you about the company's perspective on our collaboration. Thank you, Michael, for coming today.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. So we work in, my name is Michael Resnick. I'm the business manager of Hadco Metals. We buy and sell metal. It's very traditional industry, very old school. We don't do any rocket science. The way we operate, our salespeople have to have the knowledge of the market and the customer to be able to price. That's the most difficult part of their job. We are big believers in change of the market and progression as we go to the future. So that's why it was very interesting for us to participate in this project. We definitely, the guys got our trust to get into the heart of the system, because nobody going to allow researchers to play with their CRM, and we did. Our salespeople still can't recover how did we allow them to do that. But the results, as you see, are astonishing. For us, it was really important in three major results. One, the profits. In our industry, every percent, it's millions of dollars. So every percent that we can increase our profit, our board of directors are very happy about it, because they're taking a lot of money back home. Second thing is definitely the training. For us to train a salesperson to know pricing can take up to 5 years. And that's an art. And this model, or the hybrid more, allow us to maybe shorten that period. And that's very important. Preserving the organizational knowledge, like Yael said, when salesperson is out and we have that option, that allow us to keep continuity with our customers that are going to keep getting stable pricing and not rock the boat. And that's very, very important for us. We are implementing that solution. We are working with our IT teams to have that incorporate into our ERP system and the CRM system to be able to definitely increase our profit, and that's what we're aiming for. So that's very important for us. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, do you want to stay with us for answering questions?
He should take all the questions.
At least,
Come stand with us here.
at least a difficult one. Yael, Oded, Michael, thank you very much for a very impressive presentation. What I liked here a lot is it's a B2B application, and we need more in that domain. It is also a nice combination of science and art. If I take your kind of little kind of comparison of that pricing decision being an art to some degree. And let me start with the final quote that you, Yael, brought at the very end. So this kind of automation might be for B2B what Amazon did for B2C. My question is, in a sense, what you do is you kind of like replicate the salesperson, reflecting the decisions that the salesperson is making, and then giving recommendations based on that salesperson's kind of own past behavior and kind of history that you have. So you do some kind of profiling based on that. I mean, simplifying what you actually did, because it's, from a modeling perspective, much more impressive. My question is about, and maybe it's a reasonable one, if we just base recommendations on what this individual salesperson has done earlier, and as you claim, I mean, you're kind of trying to improve the salesperson's kind of pricing decisions, wouldn't it actually be smarter to not just base it on that salesperson's kind of, let's call it database? And if we use the Amazon example, using this collaborative filtering idea to also base it on other salespeople's kind of decisions to just learn from a bigger base?
So that's a very good question, and there are two parts to answering it. First of all, one benefit of using the individual salesperson is extracting the individual expertise. And what we see is that expertise is not as wide as we would guess. So applying one, even the best salesperson's model to all of the quotes did not work very well, because we see that salespeople have expertise with specific clients and specific products. Saying that, we also see benefits in learning from the aggregation of the salesforce, like you mentioned, and eventually the direction where this is going, we believe, is a combination of extracting individual expertise, but in a more sophisticated way, combining different salespeople with different expertise in the company. Oded, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting that as we approached the company with this, their immediate reaction is, why are you modeling the salesperson? Here is the best one. I can tell you this is the best one. Let's do it. So we did it. We said, yeah. Yeah, it was Michael. So we said, okay, let's model Michael. Why do we need to model each one of the salespeople? And no offense to Michael, but this model actually did not perform the best. And the reason was that there is expertise with products, there is expertise with clients, and we didn't have time to show all of the analysis we did, but we did look at some of these executive approaches of combining salespeople. We found that some combination of more salespeople, so we enjoy from the variety of products, variety of clients, did perform better than the individual salesperson. So we definitely believe there is an opportunity for an ensemble of salespeople as an eventual approach for it. But turned out it was not just let's take the best one and reapply. That didn't seem to work well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like to build on that, because there are a couple of things here. First of all, of course, we as humans are always intrigued when a management system that is mothering us is beating us, okay? So, first of all, I have a philosophical question. Could it be that the salesperson's model is beating the salesperson themselves because we face a principal agent problem, in the sense that, we have a very clear objective function for what we would want the salesperson to do, which is maximize margin, while in reality, first of all, that might not be the mandate that we communicate to the salespeople. Second, even if that's the mandate we communicate very clearly, they mix that with their own interest as an agent, and it shows up to end up as a different outcome. So that's the first question, and I'll sneak a second question, which is, do you see an opportunity as an organization to have this automated model to actually sneak in slight price increases to the consumer? One problem that you have in commodities is that everybody is afraid to make any move because they are losing their shirt, right? Or underwear, whatever. So then the question is, could you actually mix the model in such a way that you introduce random small increases? And how do you communicate to the salespeople that in that particular instance, it would be better for them to accept the recommendation rather than go with their guts?
You want to take the second part?
First of all, yes. The answer is yes. But we do that today as well, in some extent. You need to understand something about our organization. We don't have price lists. Our salespeople have to know the market and the customer to make the pricing decisions. They have to get them approved by us as management, but overall the decision is theirs. They have to come to us and tell, at this price I can get the order. I believe I can get the order. I can tweak the model to allow slight price increases, and I would, because I have to take into consideration today market conditions. And yeah, we will do that, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that with the discussions we had, part of the value of a model is that with a model you can enforce any policy that the company decides to do. So if we decide to put an extra margins or randomization into it, it is always applied. Whereas if I'm telling a salesperson, well, let's do it, it may happen or may not. And I mean, particularly, for example, in that industry, right, with the recent trading and so on, there are changes. The company can, even this morning, the company can immediately put it straight into the model and saying, well, given what we know today, let's take the model, multiply it by a particular factor, and see what happens, right? Or let's test it. So to some extent, the model, by working through a model and not through relying directly on salespeople, it allows to almost enforce such strategies.
Just one thing, we are a very open organization. We communicate information to our salespeople all the time, so they will know the market changes are happening, and we expect to see a delta in their pricing today or in tomorrow till we're going to change it. So they will see, as you say, direct them to that pricing. Yeah, but they will expect that. That's not something I'm going to sneak in. I will, they don't know the delta, what the delta is going to be, but they will expect a higher price, yes.
Right, but I think that is exactly the power of the model, where salespeople may increase but not enough because of, like you said, their own tendencies and biases. The model will be able to enforce that increase that the company intends to imply more systematically. And definitely, like you said, we believe this is where the improvement is coming from, and this is one of the big benefits of the model.
One intuition that I have here is that actually, even though you tell people that you want to maximize revenue, right, the reality is that this is based on two very different functions, which is, you know, when you lose a bid, it feels very, very differently psychologically. So I'm wondering to what extent, and basically, you know, no matter how good your salespeople are, doing an integration and having, you know, a calculator in their heads and figuring out. So one concern I have is that the reason why you simply can beat the salesperson's model is simply that they are risk averse.
Yep.
And they don't like to lose the bid. So you are helping them basically say, this is actually a place where I should increase.
And we saw it that indeed the effect was more on the winning these bids. So I actually think about it as exactly the opportunity of the model, that because you lost a bid, it doesn't mean you should now behave very differently in the next bid, right? And that's exactly the value of models, that they cut through inconsistent behavior and they reapply themselves in a very consistent way, which is exactly why I want to use them.
Terrific. Well, I'd like to thank our speakers for a great
Thank
presentation.
you.